Eastern Front, June 1941. Just after 0400 hours, the rumble began, a low thrumming that grew into a grinding roar as the German panzer divisions surged across the border, tearing into Soviet territory. The initial assessments from intelligence reports and early engagements painted a picture of an enemy ill-equipped, their armored forces a collection of crude, unsophisticated designs, easily outmatched by the superior engineering and tactical prowess of the Wehrmacht. This perception, born from a swift, overwhelming advance, would soon be challenged by an increasingly brutal reality, costing lives and shattering the illusion of an easy victory. Hauptmann Klaus Richter, a veteran tank commander of the 3rd Panzer Division, observed the first captured Soviet T-26s and BT-7s with a mixture of disdain and professional curiosity. Their riveted construction and thin armor, barely 15 millimeters on the T-26's frontal glacis, seemed almost archaic compared to the welded plates and sloped surfaces of his own Panzer III Ausf-G. The early engagements reinforced this view. The 3.7 centimeter KWK-36 cannon, standard on many German tanks, could reliably penetrate these Soviet vehicles at ranges exceeding 800 meters, often with catastrophic internal effects. His unit's after-action reports consistently noted the ease with which these tin cans, as they derisively called them, were dispatched. The Soviet tank doctrine, appearing rigid and predictable, often sent these light and medium tanks into frontal assaults without adequate support, making them vulnerable to well-coordinated German anti-tank teams and panzer ambushes. The sheer numbers, while initially surprising, seemed to German commanders to be a desperate attempt to compensate for qualitative inferiority. Production figures from captured Soviet factories, though incomplete, suggested a focus on quantity over advanced design. The T-26, for instance, had been produced in excess of 11,000 units by 1941, a staggering number, yet its design was fundamentally a derivative of the British Vickers 6-ton tank from the early 1930s. Its two-man turret, armed with a 45mm gun, offered limited situational awareness and a slow rate of fire compared to the three-man turrets of contemporary German designs. This early confidence permeated the ranks, fostering a belief that the Soviet Union's industrial capacity, though vast, was incapable of producing truly modern war machines. The German High Command, relying on these battlefield observations and pre-war intelligence, underestimated the true nature of Soviet industrial mobilization and the nascent designs incubating in their tank bureaus. The strategic implication was a miscalculation of the war's duration and the resources required to achieve victory. The early successes, while real, obscured the deeper, more formidable challenges that lay ahead. Eastern Front, July 1941. The initial euphoria of the Wehrmacht's advance across the Soviet border was quickly tempered by encounters with an unexpected adversary. German tank crews, accustomed to the swift destruction of Polish and French armor, found their standard anti-tank rounds ineffective against the new Soviet designs. This sudden shift in battlefield dynamics began to erode the confidence built on earlier victories, introducing a chilling uncertainty into their operational plans. The first reports filtering back from the spearheads spoke of tanks that simply absorbed direct hits. A 3.7 centimeter PaK-36 anti-tank gun, the ubiquitous door knocker of the early war, fired repeatedly at a KV-1 heavy tank near Rasenii. German after-action reports detailed 23 direct hits, none of which penetrated the armor. The crew inside, seemingly unconcerned, continued to engage German infantry with its 76.2mm main gun, demonstrating a level of protection previously unseen on the battlefield. The KV-1, a truly formidable machine, presented a stark contrast to German armor doctrine. Its frontal glacis plate measured 75 millimeters thick angled at 30 degrees, while its turret sides were 75 millimeters cast steel. The sheer mass of the vehicle, weighing in at 45 tons, was a testament to a design philosophy prioritizing protection above all else. This emphasis on thick, sloped armor rendered the standard German 3.7 centimeters and even the more potent 5 centimeter KWK-38 L-42 tank gun largely obsolete in head-on engagements. While the KV-1 was a shock, the T-34 medium tank proved to be a more pervasive and equally devastating surprise. Its revolutionary sloped armor, a 45 millimeter glacis plate angled at 60 degrees, provided an effective thickness of nearly 90 millimeters against horizontal impacts. This, combined with its wide tracks for superior cross-country mobility and a powerful 76.2 millimeter F-34 main gun, made it a balanced and highly effective combat vehicle. German intelligence assessments, based on pre-war assumptions, had severely underestimated Soviet tank development. Production logs from the Kharkov locomotive plant and Stalingrad tractor plant reveal that by the end of 1941, over 1,700 T-34s had been produced, with hundreds already deployed to frontline units. This quantitative output, far exceeding German expectations for a nation they believed to be technologically backward, indicated a significant strategic miscalculation. The qualitative superiority of these tanks, coupled with their increasing numbers, suggested a protracted and far more brutal conflict than initially envisioned. The psychological impact on German tank crews was profound. The previously held belief in their own technological supremacy was shattered. Confronted with tanks that could withstand their best efforts, a sense of vulnerability began to creep into their ranks. The mocking epithets of tin tanks quickly faded, replaced by a grudging respect for the imperviousness of these Soviet machines. Eastern Front, early 1944. The German infantry, once confident in their anti-tank capabilities, now faced a profound and growing frustration. Their standard issue, 3.7 centimeter Pak-36, initially nicknamed Door Knocker for its ineffectiveness against early Soviet armor, had been utterly superseded. Even the more potent 5 centimeter Pak-38, with its 50 millimeter projectile, struggled to reliably penetrate the sloped glacis of the T-34 or the thick turret of the KV-1, especially at combat ranges exceeding 500 meters. This technological mismatch began to erode morale and tactical flexibility. Unit after unit reported similar findings. A December 1943 ordnance report from Army Group Center detailed 14 instances where multiple 5 centimeter rounds struck a T-34 without achieving a mobility kill or catastrophic penetration. The projectiles, often striking at an angle, would ricochet harmlessly or leave only shallow gouges in the rolled homogeneous armor plate. The kinetic energy, while significant, was insufficient to overcome the density and metallurgical properties of the Soviet steel, which was often of inferior quality but applied in greater thickness. The 7.5 centimeter Pak-40, a more substantial weapon introduced in greater numbers from 1942, offered a significant improvement. Its tungsten-cored PZGR-40 round could penetrate 100 millimeters of armor at 500 meters, theoretically capable of defeating the T-34's frontal armor and the KV-1's side plating. However, tungsten was a scarce resource. Limiting the supply of these premium rounds, standard armor-piercing capped APCBC rounds, while more common, still required careful aiming at weak points or flanks, a luxury rarely afforded in the chaotic close-quarters engagements of the Eastern Front. Tactical doctrine began to shift under this pressure. German anti-tank teams, traditionally positioned for frontal engagements, were increasingly instructed to allow Soviet tanks to pass, then engage their more vulnerable rear or side armor. This often meant sacrificing initial defensive positions and exposing infantry to greater risk from accompanying Soviet dismounted troops. The emphasis moved from direct engagement to ambush tactics, requiring greater coordination and often sacrificing the element of surprise in favor of a more advantageous firing angle. The deployment of heavier German tanks and tank destroyers, such as the Panther and Nashorn, provided some relief, but these were never available in sufficient numbers to counter the vast quantitative superiority of Soviet armored formations. Production logs from late 1943 show that while Panther output was steadily increasing, it still lagged far behind the T-34's monthly production figures, which often exceeded 1,000 units. The qualitative edge of German heavy armor was diluted by the sheer volume of Soviet medium tanks. This disparity forced German engineers to rapidly develop and field new anti-tank weapons, often as stopgap measures. The Panzerschreck and Panzerfaust, man-portable shaped charge weapons, began to appear in increasing numbers, providing infantry with a last-ditch defense. These weapons, while effective at very close ranges, placed the soldier in extreme peril, demanding suicidal bravery to get within striking distance of an advancing Soviet tank. The psychological toll of facing seemingly impervious machines with inadequate tools was immense. The repeated failure of their primary anti-tank assets created a deep-seated apprehension among German troops. The tin tanks they had once derided were now formidable, almost mythical adversaries, capable of absorbing punishing blows and continuing their advance. This shift in perception undermined the established hierarchy of battlefield power, forcing a re-evaluation of every engagement. The sound of approaching tank tracks now carried a different, more ominous weight. The early engagements, often characterized by the sudden brutal efficacy of Soviet armor against German anti-tank measures, spurred an immediate and intense re-evaluation within the Wehrmacht's ordnance branches. Reports from the Eastern Front, compiled from frontline observations and captured Soviet materiel, detailed the unexpected resilience of the T-34 and PV-1. The standard 3.7-centimeter POC-36, once lauded as the door knocker, found its rounds simply ricocheting off the sloped glacis plates, leaving only superficial spall marks on the hardened steel. This inadequacy was not a matter of isolated incidents, but a systemic failure across numerous encounters, forcing a rapid doctrinal shift. German engineers, drawing upon existing designs and battlefield exigencies, began to accelerate projects for heavier anti-tank weaponry. The most immediate and impactful solution lay in adapting the formidable 8.8-centimeter Flak 18 and 36 anti-aircraft guns for ground combat. These weapons, initially designed to engage high-altitude bombers, possessed a high muzzle velocity and a heavy projectile, characteristics that proved devastating against the thickest Soviet armor. The first documented instance of an 8.8-centimeter Flak engaging a tank occurred during the French campaign, but it was on the Eastern Front that its true anti-tank potential was fully realized and exploited. The 8.8-centimeter Flak 36, in its anti-tank role, fired a 9.2-kilogram armor-piercing projectile at a muzzle velocity of approximately 820 meters per second. This kinetic energy translated into a penetration capability of around 100 millimeters of vertical rolled homogeneous armor at 1,000 meters, a performance far exceeding any dedicated anti-tank gun then in German service. Its distinct silhouette, often seen deployed directly on the front lines, became a symbol of German resilience against the new Soviet threat, though its inherent lack of mobility in this role presented its own tactical challenges. Production logs indicate that by late 1941, the conversion of existing Flak guns for anti-tank duties, alongside new dedicated production, ramped up significantly. Factories like Rheinmetall-Borsig and Krupp increased output, with thousands of these guns eventually being deployed to critical sectors of the Eastern Front. The gun's effectiveness was such that it often became the primary defensive asset against Soviet tank spearheads, frequently being positioned in ambush points or as the core of anti-tank strongpoints. The psychological impact of the 8.8-centimeter Flak on Soviet tank crews was profound. Where earlier German anti-tank rounds had merely chipped paint, the 88 often resulted in catastrophic kills, blowing turrets clean off or igniting ammunition racks. This shift in capability slowly eroded the initial confidence Soviet crews had in their seemingly impervious machines, introducing a new, potent threat to their advances. The very sight of an 88 emplacement could force a change in attack vectors or a more cautious approach, altering the tempo of engagements. Eastern Front, early 1944. The laughter of German crews, once echoing with derision for the thin-skinned Soviet armor, began to curdle into a grim silence. Their confident pronouncements of tin tanks and rolling coffins had been born from encounters with earlier Soviet designs, particularly the T-34, which, while revolutionary, often suffered from inadequate armor protection in its initial iterations, especially against the high-velocity 7.5-centimeter KWK-40/48 cannon of the Panzer IV, or the fearsome 8.8-centimeter KWK-36 L-56 of the Tiger I. This perceived vulnerability had fostered a dangerous complacency, a belief that German engineering and gunnery would always prevail against the mass-produced, seemingly cruder Soviet designs. This illusion shattered with the arrival of the IS-2 heavy tank, a machine designed not merely to engage enemy armor, but to obliterate fortified positions. Production logs from the Chelyabinsk-Kirov plant indicated that the first operational units began reaching frontline formations in February 1944, a stark departure from the medium tank philosophy that had dominated Soviet tank design. Its primary armament, the D-25T 122mm main gun, was a direct adaptation of a powerful field artillery piece. The A-19, renowned for its devastating high-explosive capabilities. The sheer physical dimensions of the projectile, a 122mm shell weighing approximately 25 kilograms for the high-explosive fragmentation round, OF-471, dwarfed anything previously encountered in tank-on-tank engagements. The IS-2's armor, particularly its cast hull and turret, represented a significant leap in Soviet metallurgical and design capabilities. The frontal glacis plate was angled at 60 degrees, presenting an effective thickness of well over 100 millimeters against incoming rounds, while the turret front boasted up to 100 millimeters of curved cast steel. This formidable protection, combined with the tank's low silhouette, made it a resilient target capable of shrugging off hits that would have penetrated earlier Soviet and even many German tanks. German intelligence reports, compiled from captured equipment and battlefield observations, quickly revised their assessments, noting the substantial increase in both armor thickness and effective protection. The true terror of the IS-2, however, lay in its main gun. Unlike the German doctrine that favored high-velocity, armor-piercing rounds for precise anti-tank engagements, the Soviet 122mm gun, while capable of firing armor-piercing ballistic-capped APCBC rounds, excelled with its high-explosive fragmentation HE-frag ammunition. This was a weapon designed to unleash concussive force and fragmentation over a wide area, ideal for reducing bunkers, machine gun nests, and entrenched infantry positions. Unit diaries from German infantry divisions began to record instances of fortified strongpoints, previously considered impervious to tank fire, being systematically dismantled by these new Soviet heavy tanks. A German combat engineer's after-action report from the Narva front in March 1944 detailed the destruction of a concrete bunker approximately 2 meters thick after just 3 direct hits from an IS-2. The report noted that the first shell, an HE frag round, had created a crater nearly a meter deep, spalling concrete from the interior wall. The second round, striking nearby, widened the damage, compromising the structural integrity. The third, a direct hit on the weakened section, caused the entire roof to collapse inward, entombing the machine gun crew within. The report concluded with a recommendation: immediate reevaluation of current bunker designs and anti-tank defenses is imperative. The era of casual dismissal had ended. The concrete of the bunker's observation slit, a meter thick, had been deemed impervious to all but the heaviest siege artillery. Its design, based on pre-war doctrines of static defense, anticipated the gradual attrition of lighter field guns, not the sudden, explosive impact of a heavy tank round. The German engineers, drawing from their experiences in the West, had calculated stress tolerances against known calibers, concluding that anything less than a 210mm howitzer would merely chip the outer layer. Yet the 122mm BR-471B high-explosive shell, weighing 25 kilograms, delivered a kinetic shock far exceeding those calculations. Its hardened steel cap, designed for armor penetration, acted as a localized punch, concentrating its immense energy on a small point before the main explosive charge detonated. The resulting overpressure, recorded in subsequent engineering assessments, reached an estimated 1,500 pounds per square inch within the confined space, a force few structures could withstand. Damage reports from the Eastern Front, compiled from captured German fortifications, detailed a consistent pattern. While direct hits on the thickest sections of a bunker often resulted in spalling and surface cratering, strikes near apertures, embrasures, or ventilation shafts proved catastrophic. The structural integrity, already compromised by these necessary openings, could not dissipate the shockwave effectively, leading to localized collapse and internal fragmentation. This vulnerability challenged the deeply ingrained German doctrine of static defense, which had seen the construction of extensive bunker lines across occupied territories. The perceived invincibility of these concrete strongholds had fostered a sense of security, allowing fewer personnel to hold larger sections of the front. The IS-2, with its singular, devastating punch, fundamentally altered this strategic calculus, demanding a reevaluation of defensive priorities and material allocation. The psychological impact on the defenders was profound. Previously, a bunker offered sanctuary from the incessant shelling. Now, it became a potential tomb. The knowledge that a single tank round could breach their sanctuary eroded morale, transforming a position of strength into one of precarious exposure. This shift in perception, born from the raw cower of the 122mm, rendered the concrete less a shield and more a cage. Eastern Front, late 1943. The initial derision, born of a mixture of propaganda and early battlefield encounters, had begun to curdle into a grim respect. German armored crews, once quick to dismiss the T-34 as a crude, unsophisticated machine, found their bravado tested not by the tank itself, but by the shattering impact of its heaviest ordnance. The 122mm D-25T main gun, mounted on the formidable IS-2 heavy tank, was a revelation of destructive power, a stark departure from the more common 76.2mm rounds encountered in earlier engagements. Unit diaries and after-action reports from German panzer divisions began to reflect a growing apprehension. No longer was the focus solely on penetration statistics against frontal armor. Now, the sheer concussive force of the 122mm high-explosive round became a central concern. A direct hit from this shell, even if it failed to pierce the thickest plating of a Tiger or Panther, could deform the turret ring, shatter optics, and induce catastrophic spalling within the crew compartment, turning internal surfaces into lethal shrapnel. The psychological toll of such impacts was immense, forcing crews to confront a new dimension of vulnerability. The strategic implications rippled through German tactical doctrine. Commanders, once confident in the ability of their heavy tanks to absorb multiple hits, now ordered more cautious engagements, prioritizing flanking maneuvers or overwhelming fire superiority to neutralize IS-2 threats. The 122mm shell, with its 25-kilogram weight and 2.5-kilogram explosive filler, represented a significant increase in destructive potential compared to the 88mm KWK-36 L-56's 9.5-kilogram shell, which carried 0.9 kilograms of explosive. This disparity in explosive mass meant that even near misses could disable vehicles through track damage or engine shock. The tactical shift extended beyond tank-on-tank engagements. Field fortifications, previously considered robust against most Soviet artillery, proved tragically inadequate when targeted by the IS-2's main gun. A single 122mm high-explosive round striking a concrete bunker could generate overpressure sufficient to collapse internal structures, rupture eardrums, and disorient or kill personnel without a direct breach of the outer wall. German engineers began to assess the need for deeper, more heavily reinforced bunkers, acknowledging the new threat posed by this unprecedented caliber. Interrogation files of captured German soldiers frequently mentioned the Stalin's hammer in hushed tones, referring to the IS-2 and its devastating main gun. The perceived invulnerability of their own heavy armor, a cornerstone of German morale, was slowly eroded by the knowledge that a single well-placed 122mm round could render their fighting vehicle a twisted wreck. This psychological pressure contributed to a more defensive posture in many sectors, forcing German units to expend more resources on reconnaissance and anti-tank ambushes rather than direct assaults. The production logs from Soviet factories indicated a steady increase in IS-2 deployments, with over 1,300 units manufactured by the end of 1944. This growing presence on the battlefield meant that encounters with the 122mm gun became more frequent, solidifying its reputation as a battlefield changer. The initial German mockery of tin tanks had given way to a profound respect for the destructive capability that lay within their seemingly crude designs. The dust mote settled, revealing the true cost of underestimation. The strategic implications of this burgeoning Soviet heavy tank superiority rippled far beyond individual engagements, fundamentally altering the tactical landscape of the Eastern Front. German armored doctrine, predicated on swift, concentrated breakthroughs and exploitation, found itself increasingly challenged by the sheer resilience and firepower of the new Soviet designs. The initial qualitative edge enjoyed by the Panzer IV and later the Panther and Tiger tanks, while potent in specific encounters, could not be sustained against the quantitative and increasingly qualitative improvements of Soviet production. Production logs from Wehrmacht and Czechoslovakia documented a steady escalation in heavy tank output, with the IS-2 entering service in late 1943 and reaching substantial numbers by mid-1944. This shift compelled German forces to adopt more defensive postures, often sacrificing offensive initiative to counter the growing threat posed by these heavily armored formations. The deployment of the 122mm D-25T cannon on the IS-2, with its documented ability to penetrate the frontal armor of even the Tiger I at combat ranges, forced German tank commanders to rethink engagement tactics, favoring ambush and flank attacks over direct confrontation. Interrogation files from captured German officers frequently cited the unnerving psychological impact of facing tanks that were largely impervious to their standard anti-tank weaponry. The resource drain required to counter these Soviet heavy tanks also diverted critical industrial capacity and skilled manpower. The development and production of heavier anti-tank guns, such as the 8.8-centimeter Pak-43, and the increasing reliance on specialized tank destroyers like the Jagd Panther, consumed steel, labor, and engineering talent that might otherwise have been directed towards other strategic priorities. This reactive arms race placed an unsustainable burden on Germany's wartime economy, which was already strained by fighting on multiple fronts and increasingly subjected to Allied bombing campaigns. Furthermore, the Soviet Union's ability to field heavy tanks in large numbers provided a critical psychological boost to their troops and a tangible symbol of their industrial might. It reinforced the narrative of an inevitable victory, even as the war continued to rage with immense ferocity. The sight of IS-2s leading an assault often demoralized German defenders, who understood the destructive power of the 122mm shell and the near-impenetrable nature of their sloped armor. Unit diaries frequently recorded the destructive effect of these tanks on fortified positions, turning concrete bunkers into rubble with single, well-placed shots. The operational flexibility afforded by robust heavy tank divisions allowed Soviet commanders to execute deep penetrations and exploit breaches in the German lines with greater confidence. These tanks could withstand counterattacks and maintain momentum, critical for the vast distances and fluid fronts of the Eastern European theater. The ability to push through fortified positions and engage enemy armor with overwhelming force shortened campaigns and reduced Soviet casualties in the long run, despite the initial cost of developing and deploying such complex machines. The strategic consequence was a gradual but undeniable shift in the balance of power, moving from a German qualitative advantage to a Soviet quantitative and eventually qualitative supremacy in armored warfare. The initial German underestimation of Soviet industrial capacity and design ingenuity proved to be a fatal miscalculation. By the end of 1944, Soviet production records indicated over 2,250 IS-2 tanks